Welcome to Things Around Town Savannah. I am your host, Kareem, and today we have an amazing guest, Ryan McCurdy. I got to talk to him about his upcoming show, Whiterock Cliff. In 2010, musician Ryan survived a 30-foot fall from a waterfall while he was hiking the Appalachian Trail. And this accident that nearly ended his ability to play music forever, now, after years of recovery, he has turned this experience into a one-man musical called Whiterock Cliff. Even better, he is launching a 14-state tour right here in Savannah at Asbury Memorial Church. Let's dive into this incredible story of this music, the memories, and recovery. So, hey, I have a couple of questions, and the first one that I do want to start with, because I got to read, I think it was in the Savannah Business Journal, and I know you sent me some info, so I did a little research, got some information. So, in the news release and in the information that's gone out, let's talk about Whiterock Cliff. And you described this as a blend of autobiography, fiction, folk music, and theater. Can you talk about how this came about? Well, I know how it came about. That's my second question. But let's start with what inspired you to pull these different pieces together to create this show.
I think it's because it started as the music, and I had spent the 10 years between the quote unquote incident and when the show first premiered for an audience back in 2019. I had spent that 10 years writing unrelated folk songs for what I thought was going to be an album. And I don't remember who it was, but I had played a couple at a gig in New York with my band Bonfire Falls. And someone came up after the gig and said, do you know you have like a running theme? You're writing a concept album. I'm like, well, what's the concept? They're like, well, all of your songs are about the woods. And I'm looking back and I'm like, oh, well, some of them, yeah, like some of them are very blunt. Like there's one called Whiskey in the Woods.
Okay.
But then and then the ones that were not that like clear, I dug down into the lyrics. I'm like, oh, they're about loneliness and being in the dark and being isolated and about, physical exertion. And I'm like, oh, it really, not only are they all about the woods, they're all about the Appalachian Trail. And I realized, even though I had told myself, I think, intellectually, we love to tell ourselves when we are done thinking about a thing or worrying about a thing, but sometimes our brains are much smarter than we are. And so I think my brain was saying, you're not done with this incident. You're still trying to process it, and you're processing it in the way that you process things, which is through art. And so once I realized that, instead of, continuing to fight it, I pulled all of those songs sort of out of the larger collection of the things I was writing, and I took them to my friend Ellie Pyle and said, what would you think about writing literally a jukebox musical where, unlike most jukebox musicals, these songs have never been released and no one has really ever heard them. What does that look like? What does a story built around these songs look like? And she was game, and that's how it came to be.
And let's kind of go back to the beginning, nearly 16 years ago. So there was a real life hike that you had in the Appalachian Trail at Jones Falls. Can you talk about like the real life story, and then how did this gradually grow into the story that is set in a post-apocalyptic future?
Well, the goal was to hike the whole shebang, which would have been, about a 5 or 6 month commitment. And
Very wow, you did the whole thing?
That was what we set out attempting
Wow.
to do. Yes. And to be fair, we got several hundred miles.
Okay.
We got definitely well along the way. And then I was goofing off during a lunch break. We had stepped off the trail for a couple minutes to look at this beautiful waterfall called Jones Falls in Tennessee. And I was goofing off, and I thought there was an angle from which a exciting action photo could be taken of me at the top of the waterfall. And to be fair, my traveling companion, to give her credit, she said that's a terrible idea. But she agreed to take the photo. And in fact, the photos exist. There are about 5 photos, and the first 2 I look very confident. The third, there's a glimmer of confusion on my face. The fourth, I don't look happy at all. And the fifth is about the moment that I start to fall, because you can see my muscles tensing, and I literally I fell about 30 vertical feet, bounced, it thankfully bounced a bunch on the way down, and landed at a pretty uncomfortable angle, but in a way that I didn't get my head or any vital organs, but crunched up my hands, my feet, my back pretty badly, and
Oh,
it effectively ended the whole trip. So the interesting thing was, and for those that are keeping sort of a deep dive of Savannah lore, part of the story was then that we came back to Savannah because it was my my then partner that was on the trip with me with her dog, and we came back and we're already scheduled to do the last 5 years at Muse Arts Warehouse. We had been scheduled to do that, I think, before we left on the trip, with Kimmy Sampieri directing. And we got back, and this had put kind of the screws into the relationship, in so much that I'm not passing judgment on who was right or who was wrong, but like, she viewed this as a selfish act that had ended this exciting trip, and I viewed it as, well, I was injured and that should take precedence, and we couldn't agree on how the fall had affected our relationship, and so it put this wedge in our relationship. And then we were both working on the last 5 years, which of course is famously a story about a relationship disintegrating. And by the time the show was closed, the relationship was completely done. But then the coda was, I was suddenly single and in Savannah and not sure what to do. And so about a month later, I moved to New York. And all of these things kind of ping pong. And the funny thing is, when I've told the story in New York and when I've done the show in Colorado, which is the workshop of the version we're now doing, I don't get to tell all of those kind of Savannah centric parts of the story. So I'm delighted to get to tell you and tell the audience a little bit next week as well. So.
oh, awesome. Well, I'm glad you're okay as well. I'm not. When I was reading, and I was like, well, did he fall or did somebody? So it was you who fell.
Oh yeah, well, and it shout out to my college mentor from SCAD, Dennis Elkins, who I thankfully still have a great relationship with to this day. But Dennis, ironically, was the closest person to where we were on the trail in Tennessee, because he was working in the nearby at that time at a college, and so we only had a bar of satellite signal. And so the only person I could think of to call, I'm like, I think the only person within 300 miles of where we are right now is Dennis Elkins. And so he drove his truck up to the closest place that there was a semblance of a road near the trail, which is, I think, about 3.5 miles from where we were. So I limped, and she carried most of our stuff. I limped out to the road. He met us. He had stopped to put on a Superman cape from the costume warehouse at his college, which was a wonderful touch. But then the coda of that was, there was one kind of full service Appalachian hospital that served this very remote part of North Carolina, Tennessee. And that's where we went because I needed medical attention. And the doctor, not unkindly, but sort of took a look at the situation and said, I hope you don't play any musical instruments because you've messed your hand up pretty bad. And so there was and as a pianist, that was the scariest thing I could have ever heard. And so there was definitely about 1.5 years where I could not play because my fingers weren't, I had shattered a lot of my hand. And then gradually with physical therapy, et cetera, which I think is part of maybe why I decided to use music initially as the conduit to tell the story, is because it was what was kind of taken from me in the moment, was the ability to play these instruments that I love so much, guitar and piano, et cetera. So.
And we're going to talk about the music here in a second a little bit, but I want to talk about, so when you and Ellie started collaborating on this and developing this fictional musical set, about the end of the world back in 2019, no one could have prepared us that a short couple of months later in 2020, that the world would almost mirror what you all were creating. So can you talk about how did the events of 2020, obviously, as you were, developing this, and you all were developing this, kind of reshape or change some of the things and themes that were in the show originally?
It was interesting because we had that, when you have, you know as well as I do that in the arts you have these like sometimes overcorrections when you have new information. And so, yeah, I mean, it was the reason we had said it in this post-apocalyptic world to begin with is that I had said, I want to tell. It wasn't even at that point as much about the fall off the waterfall as it was I wanted to share this very specific feeling, which was there was a day that we were. This is well before I fell, obviously, but we were but somewhere between I don't remember what city or town, and then we were headed towards Hot Springs. And there are parts of the trail where you can be 25 miles in and 25 miles to go. And it's like, if something happens, I mean, I was lucky that where I fell was, 3.5 miles instead of 25. There are parts of the trail where, you can't get airlifted very easily. And if something happens, it's not like you can turn around, because sometimes it's exactly the same distance to go back as it is to go forward. And so I had this sensation one of the nights that we were hiking, as night set in around the campsite, that there was this moment, like we turned off our flashlights, we were going to sleep, and I was like, this darkness is profound. And the trail is both this, like during the day, it's this like source of life and excitement, and it's this physical exertion that people put themselves through to be part of a club, the Thru Hikers Club, etc. But at night it becomes terrifying, because whatever your brain wants to do with the darkness, the stillness, the isolation, your brain runs rampant. And for me at that point, I was already worried about the relationship. It wasn't, I wasn't sure if this was my forever relationship. I wasn't sure that I was in a good enough shape to be out there doing this through hike. I was scared to death about other things happening in my life at the time. And so all of that was leading to this feeling. So when we started writing, I said, well, I want to use the trail as a metaphor. And for me, the metaphor was, what if the Appalachian Trail was our means of communicating both information, like a information superhighway, and then also had become the way that people moved around the eastern seaboard, and it was like, well, what would cause people to go purposefully to a place that is so isolated, so difficult to walk, et cetera, when they could just jump in a car? Well, what if they couldn't jump in a car? Well, what if the interstates didn't work? Well, what if you couldn't trust big cities anymore? And so, we were very, very careful not to ever reveal. I mean, Ellie and I know what it is, but we were careful not to reveal what had happened. But basically, there's a phone call that starts that version of the show where, they're having a normal phone call, and then sirens go off on both ends of the call. And the last thing that they're able to kind of shout across the phone is a place to meet on the Appalachian Trail, because it's something that both of them have a history with. And then the phones go dead. And so what we were kind of dealing with was this idea, and unfortunately it's become far more technologically possible in the years since. We've heard a lot about it, I think, in the last 2 or 3 years, about the idea that, if a foreign country ever wanted to really cause chaos, all you do is you fry the technology that allows us to communicate with one another. You fry our phones and then watch society crumble. So I think that was part of what we were consulting on, was this idea that they just took out our phones, and that all these two characters had on opposite ends of the trail was this destination, which is, surprise, Whiterock Cliff. And that's where they're trying to get, but for different reasons and in different ways. So when we did it in 2019, people thought the setup was, big, bold, and to some degree hilarious, because, nothing would ever cause the country to shut down like that. And then I think there was a call with our producer at the time, about April 2020, where she said, let me know what else you want to work on, because we're not doing this for a while. And then she and I had an idea in 2021, which was, well, the only thing we can legally do with Actors Equity right now is solo shows that are being streamed from a safe environment with, HVAC that, filters at a certain number of particulates. And I said, well, I have a studio in New York, a couple blocks from my apartment, that I can walk to, because you weren't allowed to take the trains at that point, to go to gigs. I'm like, I could walk to this studio. I can do the show live. And what if I did the show which is a 7-person musical? What if I did the show as a solo show and I told the story of writing the show, but also performed parts of the show and the songs from the show? And she said, that's just so crazy. It must work. So we did that for several months during COVID, and it was kind of a lifeline for me. And that was the beginning of the new version of the show, which is that while the full cast version does still exist, it has not been done in any way since that investors reading in 2019. Although there are a lot of folks that I would love to have do it if and when it comes back. But in the meantime, this solo show version of it has grown and grown and grown. And we had the idea a couple of months ago, what if I did a through hike of the states that the Appalachian Trail passes through, and instead of hiking it again, because that would be an enormous physical and financial commitment. But what if instead I perform the show one night in every state, and we find charity partners in every state? And then I kind of sat on the idea, and all of a sudden I wanted to do something for Asbury this year, like I did last year with Savannah Performance Alliance at Victory North. And then around the same time, a friend in Maine called and said, could you do something with me in Maine next year in August? And I realized, I think the universe is telling me to bridge the gap. And that's how we got to the idea of the through hike tour.
Awesome. Oh, so you answered a couple of my questions without me getting to it yet. That's good. No.
I'm ahead of the interview. I apologize.
Man, no, I love it. No, it's because it all ties, and some of those we don't. When I get to because I didn't want to ask, at least, well, you already did talk about like what inspired the tour part. I do want to, because I know Asbury Memorial is significant and why you all partner. So I want to get to that in a second. But there's one question, well, two of those I did want to ask before I get to that part of it. I wanted to talk about the music and how you use music to talk about themes of mental health, truth, memory. Because a lot of this, again, is personal, but you also incorporated, some fictional elements. So it's not technically fully autobiographical, but there's some. So can you talk about, though, for you, and then the style of music that you chose as well, like how those tied into the overall theme for the show?
That's a great question, and I think and I make this statement in the show as well, which is that I think it's important to designate the fact that when I fell off the waterfall, I did not jump off the waterfall. I definitely fell off the waterfall, but then the question has remained in my mind ever since. And it's kind of part of how I was, I've always been an adrenaline junkie, and I've always, taken things, physical things sometimes further than maybe is safe. And so there's that question of what's the difference between self-harm and putting yourself in situations that are not good for your health. And I think, and are both not to some degree explorations of your own mental health. The idea that, this life is so precious and so beautiful, and why would you ever do anything that would possibly shorten that opportunity you have for this one big buoyant life, depending on obviously what you believe about reincarnation or the afterlife, etc. And I think I definitely it's one of those times I can still fundamentally, I think it took me about 3 seconds to do the whole fall, bounce, fall, bounce, fall. And, I can, when I'm having nightmares, I can still fundamentally remember what every moment of that felt like. And because time absolutely slowed down the way they say that it slows down. And I remember being so sad because I really thought I was done. I saw the rocks coming and I'm like, well, this is it. And I remember being so sad because I've heard a lot of people say that have survived jumping off of bridges or jumping off of high objects, that as time slowed down during the fall, the first thing they thought was, oh, I really wish I hadn't done that. And I had that sensation while I was falling. I was like, I wish I hadn't done that. I want to live. I want to be present. And so in the music, the way that all ties back to the music is I've always, at that point in my life, I wasn't willing to talk about being sad, or because my life was going so well. And if you looked at it from the outside, and still to this day, like, it's so much going for me. And there's always that question of, will so much is going right. Why would you ever? What do you have to be sad about? And I think I very much internalized that. But then music was my expression of how to talk about my sadness. And so the songs, the metaphors in the songs, just the mood and the dynamics of the songs was giving me this opportunity to dialogue with myself in a way that I couldn't just with conversation, and in a way that I couldn't talk to others about it. I could sing my songs for them in a public forum and have communicated my thought, even if I didn't have to name it. And I think that was the biggest thing, is the music allowed me to communicate it without naming it, and then the show has been my bridge to be able to name and communicate it, which I think is the healthiest thing possible. And I think during COVID too, the music became so essential, because there was a whole period of COVID where it was just me in my studio in New York, playing music for myself. And it was such a healing part of my life then too, not only the songs from Whiterock Cliff, but the songs that I loved, and songs from musicals that I got to play on my keyboard just to keep myself kind of sharp. And I realized that during that period when we were losing so many, not only to COVID but also very sadly to self-harm and suicide, etc., that music was my lifeline. And so for me, it's very much I'm not so ostentatious as to think that my music is inevitably going to save lives, but I do try to go out there every time we do Whiterock Cliff, not with that as the goal, but if that is the outcome, I think myself, Martha, my sound designer, the whole team, we would be delighted to know that happened. If my music can communicate the idea that someone should stick around a little longer, then it's done its job.
Oh, and I truly think that's beautifully and well said, pre-COVID and even afterwards, because the power of theater, but then music too, is healing. It's so healing. And I do think, to your point, like you said, even if that's not the goal, like in the forefront, but somewhere subconscious, because it does it for all of us individually. And I feel like even people who, can't sing, but like you still do it because you have songs that we all love, and it helps us keep going along. It brings us forward. It moves us forward. And you started talking about, what were you about to say?
Oh, no, I was going to say I completely agree with you. And it's interesting too, because I don't think anyone's, I think it's presumptuous to think that the genre that a person looks like they appreciate, or the concerts they choose to go to, that might not even be the seed of what strikes them the most. Like for me, sharing folk music and sharing the sound that I most effectively write, like that's what I most effectively share. But I'll be honest, like for me, like the songs that do that work for me are not my own genre. For me, like Kendrick Lamar's "I Grieve Different," like like that's when that song hit. Like that song spoke to me the way I hope that my songs speak to someone else. But it's not like I don't turn on bands that sound like my own sound and feel in a lot of cases healed. But I turn on Kendrick and I turn on you and I could go on all day about the artists that inspire us in those ways. But I do think it's interesting that just what you share is not how you share it is not necessarily how you receive it artistically. But anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Sorry.
Oh no, that was a good. No, that just made me think about some stuff, even with my own musical styles and him. Like, but the variety that I listen to and what actually, reaches me, and even some of my friends too. Sometimes we'll be in the car, like on road trips, and I was like, oh, that's interesting coming from them. But then I started thinking more and seeing, like, so you really do get to see the other side of what really like resonates, like you said, versus what seems on the surface, what concerts or things that they usually would be at. I was like, So there's that variety there. You had started talking about some of your collaborators, so I wanted to ask about them. You did mention Martha. She is your production manager. And then we have JJ Collins. He's doing a special guest role in this performance here in Savannah. And then we have Katie, your manager. So let's talk about the team some. Give them some love. Let's talk about the different roles that people play and how they're helping you bring this together.
Well, first and foremost, shout out to Ellie, because the show was born from I mean, I don't think it would be presumptuous to say that, Ellie basically, uh, I had the idea and I said I wanted this thing, and then Ellie kind of had to drag me through it until I was ready to work on it myself. And so there was this whole period of time where she was turning in pages and saying, what do you think about this? And I was like, I don't want to deal with it. And she's like, well, you told me to do this. Um, and so, in a lot of ways, I am now able to work on it independently, and a lot of the solo stuff is newly written for this version of it that I've written myself. But shout out to her because she dragged me through. Because I told her it's kind of what is that? We just saw the Odyssey a couple weeks ago. It's like Pat Damon says, tie me to the mast. I want to hear the siren song, and I kind of feel like I did the same thing. Like I said I wanted to have this experience. I wanted to write this musical with her, and then every time she would ask a question, I'd be like, la 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 la, like I don't want to hear it anymore. I don't want to hear it. She's like, well, you asked me to, and you told me not to untie you until the show was done. So shout out to Ellie, and then Martha has played a lot of roles in it over the years. This run is completely self-produced, but she was the first person to step up and say, I'll produce this. She was the one that took it to task off Broadway and made sure that during COVID and got us the virtual run. She figured all that technology out for us, and then for this version, she's given us this enormous gift of a sound design that not only accompanies but also in many ways is the second character of the show, because it's us trying to share what it feels like to be in the woods, and the soundscape of the woods is very essential to what the trail is and how it serves. And then Katie, Katie is just the best, and spoiler alert, I don't think anyone would be surprised to know she's my partner too. But but part of it is I'm not going to go on a tour that doesn't involve her, and we found this great working relationship where together we can do, some is so much greater than the parts when we work together in the arts, and we learned that she had been involved for many years with my previous work here during COVID, and some of the work I was doing in the city. And so that's just continued from there. And then JJ was just JJ and I are working on a much larger duets concert together that we're hoping to do at some point next year. But, scheduling wise, that was something that it didn't look like we were going to be able to get on the calendar this year. And so I had already had the idea to have a special guest in every state, partially so that, someone with local draw would say this thing is worth coming to, and if you don't know who Ryan is, or don't care about this story, I'll be there and I'll be singing songs with him. So it was, in a way, it was because the other thing that was important to us was to have a charity partner in every state, and it's not going to do us any good to have charity partners if people don't come to the show. So it's obviously in Savannah there's kind of a built-in community that I have here that has so thoughtfully supported me in all my crazy ideas for the last 20 years. But my first thought was JJ, and I called. I said, if we're not going to do the duets show this year, what if you came and sang some duets with me at this show? And she was game, and I was so grateful for that. So she's going to be singing in the show with me, and then we're going to do a very special encore afterwards as well. And I consider her to just be one of, I wouldn't call her a secret. She's not a secret because people know how good she is, but because she does so many things so well, she's a pastor and a community leader and an activist and a performer. Because she does so many things so very well, I don't think people get as many opportunities as I think they should to appreciate the part of her that is her artistic gift. And so I'm pleased that for at least this evening, that people will just be able to enjoy JJ's beautiful voice. And I'm honored to sing with her. So
wonderful. And then we're going to talk, because this all ties back to the communities. All the proceeds from this show will go to Asbury Memorial Church and the Savannah Performing Arts Alliance. I mean, I know why, but for the people, why these two organizations, and why is it important to continue for people to engage, and not only engage but support local arts and community-focused venues and infrastructure?
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Well, I mean, I think the last time you and I spoke was I was gearing up for my fundraiser for last year, which was the piece about Mephistopheles and John Faustus, and so yeah, the shorter answer is when I left my last full-time job in theater in the city in 2024. It was just about the time that Chris Bass and Rick Garman were getting Savannah Performance Alliance off the ground, and I realized that that their mission, their goals were not only aligned with mine, but it was the work I had been wanting to do, wanted to continue to do, and I got as involved as I could as quickly as possible, and have been on their board of advisors ever since. But I think last year I had sort of set a goal in 2024 that there would be an opportunity every year moving forward to raise money for the community in some way. And so last year had raised for Savannah Performance Alliance, and then this year I think folks, Asbury is one of those things that everybody knows about Asbury, and people like generally understand that it's a very progressive church, that it's a very arts forward church, that it is very connected to the community. But I don't know that people, unless they are members or they are deeply connected to it, I don't think they realize how good the good works are there, or how dedicated the church family and the facility management, all of that, how deeply connected they are to the support of the community. And I think, not only are they housing things like the Savannah Voice Festival, and I think, so many Savannah Music Festivals perform there as well. It's not only is it this like home for the arts, but it is a safe space in which to experience the arts, because they make very clear that their version of God's home is for everybody, and the only people that are not welcome are those that would seek to disturb that sanctity, And so, and I think, especially, and I say especially, that's the wrong word, in Savannah, it's everywhere. Just having a venue for the arts does not mean that venue is safe for all lovers of the arts. And how you manage, curate, and bear that responsibility is just as essential. And Asbury, among all the other good works that they do, they have such a commitment to that sense of charity and kindness and human love. And so, this year wanting to do obviously more for Savannah Performance Alliance, which I think is just an extraordinary organization, but also realize that Asbury has given me so many gifts. And I, not only is the show a little bit already about religion and spirituality, but I couldn't imagine doing it anywhere else, because I feel so at home at Asbury, and wanted to make sure that they were able to benefit from whatever comes of how many people want or don't want to see this show. That any good fortune I have is not doesn't start and end with me. But yeah, I would encourage folks that don't know, that are listening, that don't know how good the good works at Asbury are, to get involved. And I was never a fervent churchgoer. When I was a teenager, I'd kind of gotten on a mission to go see how every possible different faith experienced God. And so I went to mosques, and I went to synagogues, and I went to sanctuaries all over the South. When I was a teenager, my parents, bless them, were like, go find out. And after I had that experience, I kind of, my end result was, okay, now I understand, and I don't think I need that. I'm glad to have experienced all this, and I'm grateful that for so many people it does so much.
Mm-hmm.
It's not my thing. And then when I got involved, thankfully through the God on Broadway series at Asbury back in 2008, I realized, okay, I'm not a churchgoer, but I am an Asbury goer. And I think that's the important thing, is for me, it intersects at that position of arts and spirituality. And Katie and I both, every Sunday that we're there, it feels like Billy and or his guest pastors, it feels like they've written the message exactly for what we needed to hear in that moment in time. And that's essential, as someone who's read the Bible several times, being able to go to a space where the Bible is used as information instead of damnation is huge. And so, I'm very excited about not only being at Asbury, but raising money for both organizations this year. I think they do dovetail in so much that last year Savannah Performance Alliance did the 24-hour plays at Asbury.
Yeah.
The Asbury has made themselves available to SPA for rehearsals in the past, and so the organizations already are intertwined. And my goal is to keep that sense of community alive.
And they have done that for so many different organizations over the years too, because I can't count how many different theater groups and people have been able to go there. They're welcoming with their space. And you do, like, I've never attended a service there, but even when I'm there, I always just feel like I'm in a space too where you're just welcomed. People are thankful that you're there. Like I said, as long as you're not bringing like that drama, the energy, the hate, like you could tell those people, but it's always just been a welcoming space. And it's been a beautiful place the few times that I've like either performed there or gone to things there, it's always been like wonderful. And it's a beautiful place too. So if you've never been, you should go. And this is for the people in the audience when they are listening.
Well, and it's really like I was looking at their community calendar last week when we were there for service, and it's just like 2 weeks after I'm probably getting the date wrong, but right after Whiterock Cliff, you could go see the Fabulous Equinox Orchestra. But 2 weeks ago, you could have seen the Magic. I think they were doing one of the Mozart operas for Savannah Voice Festival. It's like just the breadth of what they contain and offer to the community through their community partnerships is so big. I mean, I will say, Billy and Sherry, Billy Hester and Sherry Hester, Billy's the resident pastor there, and every time I've brought him what I think is one of my kookiest ideas or craziest ideas, he'll always think about it thoughtfully for a moment and then go, okay. And it's that sense of play, it's that sense of curiosity, which I think leads his not only the members but the artistic family that goes there as well. It leads us all to have richer artistic lives because it's a top-down thing. A church, in many ways, I mean, well, in the most global way, it is. The church is top-down. It's God down. But there's at every church there's this very important person standing between the message and the recipients. And in the case of Asbury, we're blessed that it's Billy and Sherry, who Billy as a top-down leader. I mean, the literal practice what you preach. It's he doesn't turn it off when the message is delivered on Sunday. He doesn't turn it off for 6 days and then turn it back on. And so I think it is that interesting curiosity and also the interest in sharing different points of view without feeling the need to commentate on them. And by that, I mean, you feel like you can say whatever you want to say at Asbury, and Billy's not going to come out afterwards and say, well, I agreed with this and I disagreed with this, and here's why. Billy allows material to be presented authentically, and he understands that his congregation and the community at large he respects their intelligence to make their own decisions, and if those decisions align with the message and with the Bible, then great. And if they don't, he is available to help people figure out how they more could be, but never proselytizes. I had been going there just to basically do drop-in performances. I did the God on Broadway did Seussical back in 2008, and then had gone to drop in and sing a couple of things for Sunday services, but never. At no point did anyone ever come up to me and say, well, you know what, you should really start coming to church. You should really start. No, they knew I was going to get to it on my own, in my own time and at my own speed. And it meant that when I did find my way to the actual services, it was so much more holistic because I didn't feel like I had been dragged there. So I one thing I love, Kareem, about being on your program is you ask such great questions that make me think about how to raise up members of our community. And I really appreciate that because I honestly think that's what keeps us going. And I felt this way last year when we did the Faustus interview as well. I listened back to it and I thought, Kareem is bringing these elevations of other people out of me and out of everyone that he speaks with. And that's so essential because otherwise, artists get into such a navel-gazing place so often. And we feel like if we're not actively saying our own names or marketing our own work, that we're never going to be appreciated. And you really kind of flip the paradigm on its head, and I appreciate that.
Oh wow. Oh, that make okay. Well, thank you. I no. When everybody says that to me, and it's not like that. That just I actually I'm not gonna cry, but that's because I really been juggling like where do I go next with everything, and I still want to continue to do it because I love what I do in this segment of it and bringing people together and talking. And we don't get enough of that. I know sometimes too as artists, certain artists they can be a little bit more shy and reserved. So it's like, no, you got to talk about your stuff and talk about the team that built it with you. Like who else is going to talk about it if we don't? And but I think if nothing else too, and I think that's been the biggest part between like this, whether it was Connect Savannah, Savannah Tribune, even when I used to write back home in Macon, is that the human element, the people, it's us. That's the part that anybody can just read a press release. That's great. And it gives information, but it's the story that connects people, and I think that what continues to draw people in. So I'm just blessed and thankful that that's what you're receiving, and others too. Because I've talked to some other people. I was like, well, when are you talking to us again too? I was like, I'm coming, so I'm gonna get on it too better. So
Well, and also the idea, sunlight being a great disinfectant too. I think I think small petty people in the arts, they survive and they thrive by convincing other people to narrow their focus. That really is the only weapon of small-minded people who are somehow succeeding or trying to succeed in the arts, especially in smaller communities. Is it's the all they have to do is convince enough people to narrow their focus and not think about challenging assumptions or doing their own research or asking the right questions. And I think that you are an antidote to that, because every time you speak with someone or you present someone, you are asking those questions. You're asking about who is the team. Nothing is being done in a vacuum. And I think the way that small-minded people succeed or try to succeed is they get enough people around them that also think that they are the only people that are making it happen, and that it doesn't take anyone else, and that everyone that thinks otherwise is an outsider. It becomes this us and them situation.
mhm.
And you are actively destroying that assumption, because you are acknowledging that these things are not happening in a vacuum. These things are not happening without complete community buy-in. And also, treating the arts community with intelligence, the way we're just talking about Billy treating his parishioners and the general arts community as if, with the intelligence they inherently have. If you treat the arts community with intelligence, you will open them up to curiosity. But if you treat them as a given, well, this is our audience, they always come, no matter what we do, we don't have to challenge them, we don't have to do this, we're going to get their money no matter what. The more you believe that, the closer you are to losing them forever. Because once a person realizes that you are not treating them with intelligence, even if you've done a good job of trying to cover it up, the moment that happens, you will lose that person forever.
It's shattered.
And
Yep.
yeah, it's done. And once that trust is shattered, it's a spider web. What was it that they say? When a fly lands in the spider web, and the spider, no matter where it is in the web, it knows, because that resonation of the vibration moving across the web. And that's the same thing. That's the means to an end. Whereas I hope that Asbury not only continues to survive but thrive, and same with Savannah Performance Alliance, and same with literally all the artists that are being supported by both organizations.
There we go. And my last question, I wanted to tie something back to the Odyssey, because you're about to go on quite the Odyssey. You're about to hit 14 states. Can you just talk about how you feel? What are you ready for? And what do you hope? Like, just talk about how you feel about this to hit this trail. Not the way that you were going to do it almost 17 years ago, but how do you feel about this? And what are you looking forward to the most in wanting people to take away from this, or what do you hope to get out of the experience? Let's say, the people, but what about you?
Well, one of the things I loved about being on the trail was meeting a bunch of people along the way that were not only from the regions that we were traveling through, but also, were hikers themselves from different parts of the world. And we met people from, Japan and England and, California and who were all out having this shared goal. But then every time you come to a town, you're interacting with the folks who, they don't just go there to serve through hikers. That's where they live. That's their community. There's that, you have to have that sense of good stewardship. You don't. A lot of people do hike the trail and cause a lot of chaos and come into the towns and, throw beer cans and shout. And, but I think there is a symbiotic relationship that you can find because the communities are definitely there to want to engage at the level at which you are willing to engage with them. And I loved meeting those folks. I loved, thank goodness to the doctors in Tennessee that, basically worked on my hand and got my hand back up to snuff so that it didn't heal wrong. And so to that end, I think I'm most excited about being able to go directly to the communities, especially since since then I have hiked many other portions of the trail in many other states. And, every part of the trail is so different depending on where you are in the country. Because whenever, the trees may all look generally the same, but once you're in the communities, they are very rooted in their community. So the biggest thing that Martha and I did when we sat down to think about whether this was a viable opportunity was we said, do we know an arts leader in all of these states? And we very quickly realized that we're blessed that we do. We know, in fact, several arts leaders in all of these states. So the biggest thing was, do we think we could call an arts leader in each of these states and start a domino effect where, it may be that I'm in a coffee house in one state and I may be in a performing arts center in another state, and I may be, part of a community event in another state. But the goal was like, what do 14 iterations of this it's just me and a guitar and my iPhone playing sound effects through the speakers. Like it is the simplest possible show. What does it look like touring the country as an intentionally simple touring writer with hopefully a very big message to share. And so I'm both excited and terrified because we only have we agreed to do it without having most of the internal parts committed to, because we're just counting on our community and our network. And ironically, that exact sense of excitement and terror is precisely what I felt setting off from Springer Mountain in North Georgia 16 years ago to start walking the Appalachian Trail. It is precisely the same feeling to do this show in this way as it was to walk. And for me, that was fun because that feeling, that dopamine release, that hits. Like that's pure jet fuel. So I'm very excited, and I'm so glad that Martha and Katie are along for the journey. And I can't wait for some of these communities to meet me in this very different way. So yeah, very, very excited.
Don't miss Whiterock Cliff at Asbury Memorial Church, featuring guest vocalist JJ Collins, with proceeds benefiting local arts. For the full story and ticket details, you can check out my Substack page, KareemMcMichael.substack.com, which is where you can find more stuff about Things Around Town Savannah. And be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and please share this. Again, I'm your host, Kareem, and hope to see you around town.